Okay, so I diagnosed this Mustang with a blown head gasket and talked to the owner about it. And between one blown head gasket and potentially a damaged head gasket and an oil pan leak, we just decided it was probably easier to pull the motor, fix it out of the car, and then put it back in. I've never really worked on a big block in an early Mustang, and I've heard horror stories about it for years and years, and it was kind of a pain to get out of there. I was grousing to Casey about, FE Fords and fitting in early Mustangs. And actually, out of curiosity, I took a tape measure to this, and across the exhaust manifolds on this motor, and this motor that could be as small as like 330 cubic inches, this one's 450 something, so it's a legitimate big block. But this distance across, compared to my big block Chevrolet, the Ford is 2 inches wider and has to fit inside the shock towers of the Mustang. Compared to, like, if you look at this, the Windsor series Ford, the 302, is a tiny, compact little thing. And even the 351 version, the block is about an inch taller on a 351 here, so it pushes the heads out correspondingly slightly wider. You can take a Windsor, like a 351 Windsor, to 427 cubic inches pretty easily. So this is kind of a big lump, but it's appropriate for the car. It's an original 390 car. It would have had this engine architecture in it. It now has a stroker. I think it's like 453 inches. Right motor for the car, just antiquated big lump of steel.
Yeah, it was quite a beating to get that thing onto the stand itself. And the clutch and flywheel had to come off.
Yeah, well, typically you would take you have to take the clutch off. You would typically take the flywheel off, and I tried to cheat because the crank doesn't have to come out of it, but it had to come off too. And the engine stand is like stretched out to its max. It is a big, heavy, antique motor, but it's right for the car. So we'll tear into it, tear the heads off of it, flip it over, pull the pan off of it, and get it ready to go back together again.
All right.
So this is a weird Ford FE thing. The intake manifold comes down and makes part of the cylinder head. So the valve cover rail crosses here, and part of the valve cover sits on the intake, part of it sits on the cylinder head. A more standard design the cylinder head would stop here and the intake would bolt on. So you get the push rods go through holes in the intake manifold. You can't pull the intake manifold off until you get the valve train off of it. Also, when you're pulling an intake manifold, the surface at the front and back, I've heard it called the China rail. But the surface at the front and back is the best place to stick a pry bar because there isn't any machine surface that you'll damage. Still wrestling the big heavy motor around. Fords will oftentimes have this, you can see it up here, little rubber hose connecting the intake manifold to the water pump, which is often a hassle. And I'm going to see if I can pull the intake manifold off and out of that hose at the same time. There it is. So just because we're here, let me get past you. Just because we're here, I want to pull out a couple of lifters and look at the bottom of them. And I don't know if you can get it on camera. And I can't even see it myself, but the lifter has a very slight crown this way. And when they start wearing out, they'll go concave, or they'll go flat first and they'll go concave. But since this is a brand new motor, I just want to look at a couple of lifters and see if I see a problem. Everything looks pretty good.
What does the being concave tell you? Is that just where it hits the cam lobe?
It's convex, and it should be convex. The cam lobes, if you're looking through the motor on this plane, the cam lobes are angled forward slightly. Okay. To keep the cam from moving around. So there's a slight angle built into the cam, and there's a slight dome on the bottom of the lifter. The way they're designed, as the cam spins, it spins the lifter. And it keeps the lifter from just sitting in place and wearing out. Okay, this head's ready to come off. One thing I always do before I pop a cylinder head off, all the bolts are out of it now, but I always take one in the middle and turn it in a couple of threads just in case. And that'll just roll right off of there. So it sits on dowel pins, and sometimes you have to pop them up off. So I just have a bolt, a couple of threads in, make sure it comes off the dowels, and then you can lift it off. And there you go.
Uh-oh. Whoa!
That is exactly what I thought. The two dead holes next to each other would make me think that it's got a head gasket blown between the two cylinders. So my guess is head gasket.
Okay. Yep.
Head gasket is blown right between two cylinders.
Yep.
You can see it here on the block. You can see the staining where the exhaust was blowing back and forth between.
Yeah,
and you
really
can.
Well. Can you pull that carbon off of it?
I don't know if you can get that, but it's smooth there, and it's.
Yeah, that's definitely obvious compared to this one right here.
You can see it on the cylinder head too. Let me put up here on the bench.
Yeah, it's hard to tell on the other video the rough idling when you were pulling the spark plug wires out, but it was obvious whenever one of them you pulled in the idling, you could see the engine shaking. You couldn't hear it that well because it was pretty loud.
Yeah, so you can see right here. You can even see the fire ring on the gasket, which is what makes the combustion seal.
Yep.
And look, you can see it because it was blown through. You can see the fire ring curving off and disappearing. You can see it right there too.
Yeah. All right, well.
So that explains two dead holes. Compression on one side would blow into this one. Compression on this side would blow into that one. And whichever one it was, however the firing order lined up, one of these intake valves was open when the piston was coming up on the other side, blowing through, blowing up the valve, and you could hear the air pressure hitting the bottom of the carburetor. So that's what's wrong with it. We'll take the other cylinder head off of it, pull the pan off of it, order gaskets, put it back together again. But that's what a blown head gasket looks like.
All right, perfect.
Are you rolling?
I'm rolling.
I thought I saw something on this one between those two cylinders, same thing there, but I think that's probably just some of the gasket material sticking when it came off. But that's the good side.
Yeah.
That's the bad side.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all we need to do today, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Because I'm not putting it back together right now.
No.
Yeah, that's true, because you don't pull the engine out for a head gasket,
Yeah.
not necessarily.
Yeah. All right,